My material's not copyrighted. You can use mine any way you want.
This one's for you, Kent.
If you want to get any of my video materials, they're not copyrighted.
Check it out. You're a fucktard, aren't you, Kent? You're a fucktard, aren't you, Kent? You're a fucktard, aren't you, Kent? You're a fucktard, aren't you, Kent?
4.6 billion years ago, the Earth cooled down, formed a hard rocky crust, and it rained on the rocks for millions of years and turned them into soup.
And that's why today we have Campbell's soup. I'm sorry, it's just really hard to take this seriously anymore.
And the soup came alive about 3 billion years ago. This is what the books teach.
I gather from that statement that despite your claim to enjoy reading textbooks, you're borderline illiterate. The way to solve that problem is to learn to read properly and then read. Don't just make things up that you think books say.
This fellow says, both the origin of life and the origin of major groups of animals remains unknown.
Well, he's right to some extent about the origins of life, but as far as the major groups of animals, is he unfamiliar with the theory of evolution, or does he disagree with it, as you seem to be implying? Or does he mean something that isn't obvious without the context? I'd really love to read the article to understand the context, but it's from Grolier Multimedia Encyclopedia from 1998, so even if I had a copy, I'd probably have some difficulty getting it to run without setting up a virtual machine or something. So, I don't know, for the sake of keeping the conversation going, I guess I'll just take your word for it that the guy's as ignorant as you say he is. Sorry, guy. If it's true, it's a little unfortunate, since I'm sure this product was installed in a lot of elementary school computer labs. But related to that, even though I know you're just throwing this quote up as a cheap way to convince your audience that someone, somewhere agrees with your opinion, which they'll think is relevant because church and TV have taught them to always assume that someone, somewhere grants instant credibility to any statement, I have to ask, why the hell are you referencing Grolier Multimedia Encyclopedia? That's kind of like citing a Wikipedia. The only difference with Grolier and these other CD-based encyclopedias of the ancient past is that they've been fact-checked by fewer people, they can never be corrected, and they make it harder for anyone to check your source.
How did life get started anyway? Well, this textbook tells the kids, oceans formed as it rained on the rocks for millions of years. Yes, boys and girls, millions of years of torrential rains created great oceans. And swirling in the waters of the oceans is a bubbling broth of complex chemicals. Progress from a complex chemical soup to a living organism is very slow. Well, I guess it is. It's totally stopped. Doesn't even happen. That's how slow it is.
I considered complaining about your assertion of a negative, but as long as you don't claim certainty, I pretty much agree with you. Most likely, anything that could give rise to new life would be devoured by modern, highly evolved life before the chemistry could even progress far enough to call it life. But that makes the claim that life still arises today borderline unfalsifiable, so I'll just caution you to avoid getting too close to a claim of certainty either way. In any situation like this, it's safer to stick with probabilities only. But there's a more subtle problem with what you said, which is that you seem to imply that we should expect to find new life arising today, and that if we don't, it's evidence against it happening in the past. That's not true, since the Earth is a dynamic planet with changing conditions, and the environment of billions of years ago was not the same as today's environment.
This one says the first self-replicating systems must have emerged in this organic soup. Was your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa soup? I think that's stupid, okay?
Checkmate, evolutionists. That figurative language sounds silly and unintuitive to me when I tell it as a joke. That's a killer argument against it being true.
Now, if they want to believe it, that's fine. I don't care what they believe, but don't call it science.
If I may quote Mr. Hovind from page 60 of your 1991 doctoral dissertation, they tell me that grass is some sort of green. It looks like the rest of the world that I've seen. It tastes a lot different than jelly or cheese. If I smell it too long, it sure makes me sneeze. Ah, damn, sorry, that was from page 82. Silly me. Shuffle, shuffle, shuffle. Okay, found page 60, sorry for the confusion. Remember, that's page 60 of, I again remind the audience, your doctoral dissertation for your PhD. But I'm not sure why I mentioned that. Alright, here we go. I'm also sad because those who reject the words of this blessed book are missing the greatest joy known to man, fellowship with God. They are also missing the real reason and purpose of life. If the words of the time-tested book are true, those who reject them and the forgiveness they offer are doomed to face God and give an account of their sin before their Creator. God will be their judge on that day, whereas he will be my Father on that day. This topic is personal for me. It's not just academic. If someone says that the Bible is a myth and is not true, or that the doctrine of evolution is true and the Genesis account of creation is false, they are attacking the very foundation of my faith. Jesus said that the creation of Adam and Eve was the beginning. Matthew 19:4. It would be like saying that my father is a liar. Calling Genesis a myth or creation a myth is like saying slanderous things about my mom or dad or wife or family. It will be hard for me not to get emotionally involved in this topic. Mr. Hovind, perhaps you can say honestly that you believe that people should be allowed the freedom of their belief. However, you absolutely cannot say honestly that you do not care that they believe it.
What happened back in the 1950s, a guy named Miller and Urey wanted to know how the Earth and solar system had come to be. So they tell the kids he took a mixture of Earth's primitive atmosphere. We'll talk about that in a minute. He never proved how life originated, but he did add evidence to the theory that life could have started by itself. Well, is that true? Now, did he really do that?
Yes. The experiment showed that organic compounds like amino acids can be formed from atmospheric gases with the application of energy. At the time, they thought that the highly reducing atmosphere used in the experiment probably represented the atmosphere of the early Earth. Nowadays, just like when your video was made, the Miller-Urey experiment is obsolete in the sense that further evidence has shown that the atmosphere used was likely not representative of the actual primitive atmosphere. But it did show that it could be done, which lends weight to ideas such as that organic molecules could have originated in local reducing environments such as volcanic plumes or deep-sea thermal vents, or been transported to Earth from extraterrestrial reducing environments like meteorites. I guess that's all that really needs to be said about it, and we can end the conversation now since you're talking about it in 2001, long after it had been recognized by the scientific community that it used an incorrect atmosphere, and therefore any criticisms that you'll have about the particulars of the experiment will be largely irrelevant. Right?
This textbook tells the kids many important events occurred during the Archean era, the most important of which was the evolution of life. Progress from complex molecules to even simplest living organism was a very long process. Long ago and far away.
You say that, long ago and far away, as though you have an objection, but I'm curious what you would prefer them to write. It was a very short process? Well, that wouldn't make much sense because it wasn't.
Fairy tale kids, coming up. First living cells emerged 4 billion to 3.8 billion years ago. I like that word, emerged. They use it all the time, like that explains how it happened, you know? It just emerged.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the word emerged is not actually intended as a comprehensive explanation of how it happened. What do you want them to do? Put an entire chapter in parentheses in the middle of the sentence to explain abiogenesis?
There is no record of the event, they tell the kids. Look, kid, we know what happened and you're going to be tested on this, but there's no proof.
There's plenty of evidence that the first cells emerged then, or at least maybe a little bit later, like 3.5 billion years ago. What they're probably saying there's no record of are the specific events that led to the life that led to those cells, which is to be expected because the chemical reactions leading to life were in and of themselves very minor events that would have left so little evidence that there's probably no way to ever detect it. The surrounding conditions, that is, the environment on the early Earth, are something that we can investigate to some extent, but the reactions themselves are probably lost to history forever. This is very different from other events and processes that offend creationists like yourself, such as the Big Bang and evolution, which leave a profound mark on the universe and the planet, giving us much more data to use and much more certainty about what actually happened in the past.
First living self-replicating systems must have emerged in this soup. I don't think so. Here's what students are taught in school. This picture of the different glass tubes and flasks and pipes going around, they tell them this is how they made life in the laboratory.
The Archean era. In early March on the 1-year calendar of Earth history. Oh, okay, so this is that calendar that takes the entire history of the Earth and packs it into 1 year to give you a more comprehensible idea of the timescales involved. In early March on the 1-year calendar of Earth history, the Archean era began. Many important events occurred during the Archean era, the most important of which, according to scientists, was the evolution of life. Oh, that's awesome. This is that quote you had before with the ellipsis in it. You know, this one. So that's great. I guess you weren't hiding anything too important behind that ellipsis. You kind of used it properly for once. Okay, and then something covered by the arrow, I'm gonna guess amongst the many different molecules on the surface of the primitive Earth, complex organic molecules containing carbon were probably common. However, the progress from complex molecules to even the simplest living organism was a very long process. Okay, so this is the other quote from the slide you showed before. It says nothing about the created life in a lab. Nor would it, because they didn't. What the hell are you talking about?
He said he studied the chemical reactions of gases that existed in Earth's primitive atmosphere. Ooh, now this is important, okay? Notice up in the upper right-hand corner, he had methane, ammonia, water vapor, and hydrogen. No oxygen. He circulated these gases through these tubes through a spark, supposed to represent lightning. And sure enough, it produced a red goo at the bottom of the flask and had some amino acids in it. They didn't come close to getting life, though.
Yeah, I know, right? What a couple failures. Failing to create life in an experiment which, according to their own paper, specifically prevented life from forming. God, they suck.
Miller excluded oxygen in a reducing atmosphere because life could not evolve with oxygen.
Actually, they tested in a reducing atmosphere because they were testing the Oper and Haldane hypothesis, which suggested that organic compounds could be synthesized in a reducing atmosphere when energy was applied, and at that time it was also thought likely that the atmosphere used in the experiment reflected the atmosphere of the primitive Earth. As I already said, that's no longer the case, although the oxygen levels in the primitive atmosphere would still be much lower than they are today because the oxygen in the atmosphere is primarily a result of life. But you are right in the sense that that model and that experiment rely on the reducing atmosphere. If you were to use the same experimental setup but with an oxidizing atmosphere, you wouldn't get those amino acids. So for once, after one of your statements, I don't completely feel the need to stab myself in the ears. And of course, that actually gets me curious to see where you're going with this, so continue.
Anything that got together would oxidize. Cut a banana open, lay it on the table, it'll turn brown, it'll oxidize, okay? So will an apple, so will anything alive. It'll oxidize. So that's why he didn't have any oxygen in the experiment. One of his gases was ammonia. Well, this creates a real serious problem because ammonia is destroyed by UV light. And UV light must be blocked by ozone, which is made from oxygen.
Sure. As with any molecule, ammonia will break down when exposed to wavelengths of light short enough to break its bonds, in this case, the nitrogen-hydrogen bond. If they weren't shielded somehow, the ammonia and the methane would both have that problem. Of course, ozone isn't the only thing that blocks UV. A thick atmosphere with heavy clouds of water vapor and volcanic ash will do that too. But since, as I've been saying over and over and over, the miliary atmosphere is unlikely and therefore the scientific consensus has moved away from that model, because, as I know you don't know, the whole point of science is that when you find contradictory evidence, you have to change your opinion, and so they did. This is a pointless discussion. It would have been real interesting in 1954, but that was 60 years ago. In the intervening time, a good dozen or so quite different experiments had been performed based on different reactants and energy sources, some of them much more likely than the Miller-Urey model. So how about let's move our discussion beyond the 1950s?
And by the way, the Earth has always had oxygen, even more than it does today, okay? Air bubbles are often found trapped in amber, like the movie Jurassic Park, you know, where they drilled in and got the mosquito blood. These air bubbles, though, have 50% more oxygen than we do right now.
Do you know where amber comes from? We're talking about the pre-life environment on Earth. You're trying to show that the pre-life environment on Earth had more oxygen than we have now because amber contains more oxygen than we have now. Amber that came from trees. Do you see the problem?
Nope.
Oh, right, sorry, I forgot who I was talking to.
Okay, little Kenty, why don't you come with me to the library? I can recommend a great book called Are Trees Alive by Debbie S. Miller. Spoiler alert.
Yes!
But this textbook says the mixture at the bottom of the flask was rich in amino acids. Oh, come on. That is stupid. It was not rich in amino acids. Let's tell the kids what they really found, okay? He filtered out the product, As this gas went through the tubes, he sparked it, produced this goo at the bottom, and he drew the goo off, because if it went through again, it would be destroyed by the spark.
So he simulated lightning striking multiple places one time each, which seems pretty reasonable. So far, so good.
Now, in real life, you're not going to get a section of the ocean protected.
There are several problems with what you're saying. The first is that there are many potential energy sources beyond an electrical discharge. Yeah, an electrical discharge happened to be used in this experiment, but other more likely energy sources have been used in later experiments and have actually been more effective. Not to mention that even if lightning was the correct energy source, these amino acids are washing around in the ocean, not sitting on the surface waiting to be struck repeatedly by lightning that's unlikely to strike the same place repeatedly anyway. And even if we ignore all that, contrary to your assertion, there are sections of the ocean that are protected from lightning. I could mention something as simple as a coastal cave, or even just every bit of the ocean too deep for lightning to penetrate. And ignoring even that, the point of the experiment was just to show that amino acids could be formed at all. That means that they designed it so that if they produced amino acids, they could actually tell instead of destroying them for no reason at all. As I keep telling you, this was not an experiment to try to prove abiogenesis.
They say this just happened by chance in the ocean. You can't filter out the product then.
You can't filter out the product, by which you mean stop exposing the product to repeated lightning strikes in the ocean. Kent, you're from Florida. You know damn well what the ocean looks like. It's not a kiddie pool surrounded by Tesla coils.
Secondly, what he made was 85% tar, 13% carboxylic acid, 2% amino acids.
You know, it's kind of funny. When I was looking into this claim, I found that creationists seem split on whether the 13% was carbolic acid or carboxylic acids. That's a pretty amusing fail on somebody's part. And, well, at first I thought you got it right and said carboxylic acids, where a whole bunch of other creationists said carbolic acid. I'm not so sure anymore. You might have an amusing fail of your own here. You say carboxylic acid, leaving off the S in acids as though to imply that it's one acid and not a whole group sharing a particular trait. And you say that 13% of the product was carboxylic acids and 2% of the product was amino acids. Amino acids are carboxylic. It's possible that you meant that 15% of the product was composed of carboxylic acids and only 2 of those 15% were amino acids, with the other 13 being non-amino carboxylic acids. But your phrasing implies that amino acids aren't carboxylic, which is just silly. And your slide also says that carboxylic acids are toxic to life, which is even sillier. You know, I really like to be fair in these videos, and I'd love to have the opportunity to give you just a tiny bit of credit when it's earned. But yet again, I find myself unable to do that because it's impossible to tell if you're accurate and just bad at English, or if you're just hilariously wrong.
So 98% of his mixture was poisonous to life.
Okay, well, whether it's poisonous to life is irrelevant to the experiment, but I understand that what you really mean to object to here is the concept of life arising in a primordial soup formed by this method, because you have the idea that it would result in the death of any life in it, or prevent it from emerging in the first place. So there are a few things to point out here. The first and most obvious is that the primordial soup of Oprin and Miller is not the modern scientific consensus. It isn't in 2014, and it wasn't in 2001. You really don't seem to grasp that simple concept, even though I keep repeating it. The second thing, as I keep saying, is that the experiment's contribution to knowledge is that amino acids can be produced, not an explanation of abiogenesis. The third thing is that the Miller experiment ran for a period of 1 week, not millions of years, and in a closed series of little flasks and tubes, not an ocean. The fourth thing is that the 85% tar you mentioned probably refers to this. A substantial quantity of polymer or tar was found, perhaps a cyanide aldehyde or mixed cyanide aldehyde polymer. Since I'm not an organic chemist, I don't know if or why this would necessarily be poisonous to all possible original life forms. The fact that cyanide is produced by or found in numerous life forms, such as bacteria, fungi, algae, and plants, would lead me to question that assertion for cyanide, and the nonspecific aldehydes includes, for example, cinnamaldehyde, which gives cinnamon its flavor and is a common flavoring for food. Neither cyanide nor aldehyde seem necessarily deadly to all possible life. And I may be misinterpreting this, but it seems like this says that hydrogen cyanide, aldehydes, and ammonia react to form amino acids, which I've circled in red. To me, as a layman, that seems to indicate that a cyanide-aldehyde polymer could actually contribute to the formation of more amino acids and eventually be mostly replaced by amino acids if the reactions continued. If that's correct, then it seems like the tar could be almost totally removed by being reacted into amino acids long before life ever appeared. So if you really want to beat this dead horse of an experiment even further into the ground by proving that its products would necessarily prevent the formation of life, provide some actual chemistry to back it up.
I would not call that a success.
I know you wouldn't, but anyone scientifically competent would. The experiment produced reproducible results which, regardless of the outcome, is a success. And as a matter of fact, it also confirmed the hypothesis. As predicted, amino acids were produced, and that was all the experiment was designed to test. What you seem to be objecting to is the fact that this one experiment, designed to test only one specific hypothesis, did not result in a complete, final description of the mechanisms for the origin of life, and a resolution to every outstanding question and problem related to it, and judging by your constant misrepresentation of it as being intended to produce life, you also object that it didn't achieve the unintended, unexpected, unpredicted, and specifically prevented result of producing life, which further demonstrates your pathetic level of understanding of the scientific method and the Miller-Urey experiment.
And there are 20 different amino acids, sort of like 26 letters in the alphabet. There are 20 amino acids. Those amino acids go together to make proteins, like letters go together to make sentences. Mostly he made just 2 of these amino acids. And they bond with the tar and the acid very quickly, more readily than with each other.
Okay, great. So why do the amino acids bond more quickly with a vaguely defined cyanide-aldehyde polymer tar, or with every carboxylic acid lacking an amine group more quickly than with each other? Can I see some equations? And by the way, where'd you get your information? Did you do the Miller-Urey experiment yourself and race the amino acids against the polymer and the other carboxylic acids to see what bonded to what first, or did you find a paper describing these reactions? If the latter, can you tell me your source? I'd try to find it myself, but since this entire conversation has been recognized as irrelevant for decades by everyone except creationists, I really can't be arsed. So, while you work on getting that information to me, I'll humor you for the moment and explain a few things. Let's assume that you're correct, and let's pretend that the primordial soup was the current consensus model, and that you found a real problem here. What's the next step? Is it to immediately give up, declare abiogenesis impossible despite not being able to prove that negative, and believe in divine creation despite not being able to prove that positive until you propose some way to reliably validate your particular god's existence, abilities, and past actions? Clearly not. The only option that's really open to us here is to work based on what we know is physically possible. We know that chemistry is physically possible and happens constantly. We know that amino acids and proteins can originate through chemical reactions, but we don't know that an omnipresent, omnipotent, extra-universal deity is physically possible. We know that life is a series of complex chemical reactions, and I don't see how it's unreasonable to suppose that a series of chemical reactions might have arisen chemically. So for the moment, we're pretty much stuck investigating abiogenesis. It's the course of action most likely to lead to a working theory until somebody comes up with a better idea, which, for the record,
It was magic or whatever. Stop asking questions.
isn't. It'd be unthinkable to me to take your claim of divine creation seriously until we've at least established God's physical possibility, existence, and abilities as facts, because the only possible outcomes of that kind of intellectual laziness would be to get the answer wrong, or at astronomical odds to get the answer right, but never have any reason to think we did or any way to know we did. Regardless of whether we're talking about the real world or your little pretend world where you're completely right, further experiments have to be done to resolve the outstanding problems and figure out the next steps that could have led to life, because the only way we'll ever know what likely happened is to know what could have happened. These experiments are still being done from time to time and various ideas are floating around, but not enough, unfortunately, is being done to move very quickly. For now, all we can say is that we know roughly when life originated, but that the exact process is still unknown and probably always will be, except in the sense that later experiments can help to better calculate the probabilities of the possibilities. Jumping to conclusions or expecting a final answer at this point is, to put it mildly, unscientific and stupid.
Amino acids are like letters of the alphabet, sort of like building blocks. You have to have a bunch of amino acids to make a protein. Then you have to have a bunch of proteins to make a cell. And you got to have a bunch of cells to make an organism. And one cell is more complex than a space shuttle. And all he got was a couple of the amino acids. That's like me dropping toothpicks, and I happen to make a few letters of the alphabet.
Chemistry isn't random, so no. It's not at all like dropping toothpicks and randomly having them form letters, because toothpicks aren't inclined by their physical properties to make letters.
But if I'm able to drop toothpicks and produce a few letters of the alphabet, should I therefore conclude that nobody wrote Webster's dictionary? The difference between making a letter with toothpicks and making Webster's dictionary is about like making an amino acid and making a living cell.
Let me get this straight. You're comparing predictable chemical processes, leading to self-reproducing chemical entities and the subsequent changes in those entities over generations due to natural application of selection forces. In other words, the processes leading from pre-life to the first life and so on up to cells, to dropping toothpicks and deciding for no reason that nobody wrote Webster's dictionary. And you think that the ideal response to an open question on the origin of life isn't, "This is interesting, let's find out what possibilities exist and test them to see how probable they are." No, you think it's,
I read this book that says a god spoke it into existence through some mechanism that nobody bothered to explain and that doesn't match observed reality whatsoever. That's the only answer that makes any sense at all. And all those other books with creation stories are crap because my parents arbitrarily chose to give me this one first. So stop experimenting, you dummies. Reality can't tell you what's possible in reality. Only this here book can.
Christ on a cock, you're really not the sharpest toothpick on the pile, are you?
He didn't come close to making life. He made the equivalent of a few letters, and he actually needed to make huge books. And half of his letters were backwards, left-handed. This creates a real problem since the simplest proteins, the smallest proteins, have 70 to 100 amino acids, all of them left-handed. This really compounds his problem. RNA and DNA are all right-handed molecules.
Well, hey, would you look at that? A good question. Well, I mean, it's good aside from the fact that you're talking about the Miller-Urey experiment that ran for a week in a simple limited environment and clearly wouldn't produce the result you seem to think it should, nor was it intended to. But in a more general sense, this is an interesting question, and it still needs a solid answer. Fortunately for us, real scientists don't operate like school kids with ADD.
Neat, I produced amino acids. Aw, shucks, they're in a racemic mixture. Well, gee, I'm sure not gonna try to figure that one out. I'ma go play hoop and stick with Yahweh.
Or, you know, whatever game the kids are playing nowadays. Now, Kent, that's creationist thinking. Meanwhile, while you guys have been jerking off into your Bibles, the scientists have actually been coming up with ideas and running the experiments to figure it out, which, as you can see by the few papers linked in the description, has resulted in some promising leads. Golly gee gosh, I'm sure glad we live in a scientific society where questions about reality are answered by, you know, testing reality, instead of the uninquisitive hell world you want, where every challenging question is immediately declared to have no possible answer other than whatever nonsense your parents told you to shut you up when you were being a snotty little shitheel and your dad was too lazy to use the belt, and you go play with your imaginary friend. Although at this point, if you ran off to play with your imaginary friend right now and left me alone, I wouldn't object.
And hundreds of these amino acids must combine to make a protein, and this has to be in a precise order.
Kent, nobody's saying that amino acids just suddenly bonded together into modern proteins any more than they're saying that proteins suddenly form modern cells. If you're going to argue against something, have the integrity to argue against what scientists actually say instead of the idiotic ideas that you invent and then assign to them. But I guess then you wouldn't have much of an argument, would you?
And they unbond in water much faster than they bond. And last time I checked, the oceans are completely full of water.
I gotta be honest here, I'm not quite sure what you mean. I think you're saying that peptide bonds are broken faster in water than they're formed? But that's not true because hydrolysis is very slow. Peptide bonds are quite stable. You really need to be more specific about what you mean. Or you could stop making shit up.
So Brownian motion is going to drive them away from each other, not together.
Yeah, Brownian motion would have some effect on the molecules, but I think you're exaggerating it a little. Particles mingle all the time in the ocean. Besides, a good number of the amino acids are hydrophobic, so they'd be more inclined to cluster together like oil and water. The others would float around a little more independently, sure, and I could see Brownian motion being an issue for small amounts of organic matter in the open ocean, diluting it thinly, but the ocean has lots of different kinds of locations, like bays and so forth, that would prevent the molecules from moving too far apart, and the quantity of material could increase to relatively high concentrations even so, depending on the atmospheric conditions. But if you have experimental evidence that Brownian motion is significant enough to prevent amino acids from ever mingling in non-negligible concentrations in the early ocean under all possible circumstances, please do provide it. Until then, don't feel too bad when people don't take you seriously.
It just isn't going to work. He did not make life in the laboratory. But they tell the kids, he showed how life could have started by itself. Oh, that is just a stupid, okay? That's a lie.
Yeah, it clearly is, you lying fuck. If you're gonna tell a lie, don't show everyone a slide that gives you away. That doesn't say Urey showed how life could have started by itself. It says that he added evidence to the theory that it could have started by itself. That's a massive difference, since the former would involve creating a theory of abiogenesis or generating life in the lab, neither of which the experiment was even meant to do, while the other would only require confirming some small hypothesis related to the theory which the experiment was meant to do. Yet again, you've misrepresented the nature and purpose of the experiment. Oh, and by the way, didn't he refer to Miller at the start of your rant and not Urey? Or are Miller and Urey really the same person? What a twist!
And every experiment since then has made the problem worse. They're finding more and more things that just couldn't happen. Don't call that science.
Mr. Hovind, if they're doing experiments and eliminating possibilities, or in your words, finding more and more things that just couldn't happen, then they're increasing our body of knowledge of what isn't possible. That's science. What isn't science is claiming that something isn't possible without ever bothering to check if it actually is. Oh, and they're also finding more and more things that could happen, but your crippling case of confirmation bias wouldn't let you mention that, would it? Every time the scientists' results can be mangled to fit your narrative, they have credibility in your eyes, but every time they can't, which is usually, there's a giant conspiracy of Bible-hating atheist, evolutionist, abortionist, Satanist, Nazi socialists. I'm sorry, but if you're going to assume that research is always credible when you can mangle it to support your worldview, then you should also assume it's credible when you can't. Or rather, you should do that if you ever change your mind and start to actually want people to think you're credible. Lick my balls, Kent.
No, you lick my balls. Oh my god! You! How are you still alive? Your plans have failed, imposter. You thought that I would surely die in that tower prison cell in the Reptoid Enclave, but you forgot to remove the toothpicks from my pocket. I dropped them from the window of my cell, and thanks to evolution, as I had predicted, they randomly assembled themselves into a message asking for help. That's not evolution, that's... Wait, who helped you escape? It doesn't matter. What does matter is fuck you! I used to make my wife feel so sensual, and then you came along and you did it instead. You stole her from me, and then you made her think you were me, and then you fucked her all over our kitchen furniture. That's rape, you massive douche. And who do you think had to clean it all up? She doesn't even have proper hands, and she's just a poorly cropped picture. And ever since I returned after you died from your irresponsible eating habits, all I hear about is how great I was in bed for a while and how crap I am again all of a sudden. And now, just today, you involved my son in making some stupid point in your video, and as a result, he died in a Hello Kitty car accident. And your videos suck, they're not even monotone. And you're ugly, your face is made of pantyhose, and you don't even have the integrity to show your ears. Ears are gross, and so is Eve. And your kid was dead already 2 years ago, so I don't see the problem with him being roadkill now. Screw you, man! You took away everything that was precious to me, and now you give me insults instead of apologies? Well, I've got news for you. I'm gonna take away what's most precious to you! Your Teddy! Oh, really? Well, you're a bit late. I mean, you know somebody already did that, right? The video's been up on my channel for like 2 months. Hey, ease it! Some guy's here to steal your teddy!
What? Don't let him get away!
But they tell the kids, 3 billion years ago, life appeared on Earth.
You just spent all that time trying to claim that abiogenesis, an explanation for how life appeared, is impossible, and then you made that statement as though you've demonstrated by doing so that the estimate for when life appeared is wrong. As I think I said before, there's lots of evidence for when life originated. By attacking the proposals for how it originated, you've said nothing whatsoever about the when. Idiot. Do I have to use another car analogy? Don't you make me use another car analogy, mister! And it's not 3 billion, by the way, it's at least 3.5 billion, but hey, 500 million years doesn't matter, right? It's just 83,000 and change times what you think the whole age of the universe is.
I was asked me to speak at this college in Boston one time. I got my charts out and I said, now folks, I believe the Bible. Nobody cheered. I said, I believe about 6,000 years ago God made everything. The world's not millions of years old. 4.6 billion years ago, there was a big flood. I'm sorry, 4,400 years ago, there was a big flood, not 4.6. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus came, and I gave them the basic Bible story, okay? Then I told them what they believe. Because most of them don't know what they believe. You have to tell them.
Always a great way to get it right and not be laughed out of the room. It's always a real effective tool when you make up something and tell people they believe it. For example, you believe that you can't accept scientific facts because the goblins who live in your shower drain raid your panty drawer at night when you do. This belief is called Christianity. It's stupid because there are no goblins in the drain and your panty drawer has never been raided. Now don't you see why you shouldn't be a Christian?
You guys believe 20 billion years ago there was a big bang where nothing exploded and produced everything. 4.6 billion years ago the earth cooled down, made a hard rocky crust. It rained on the rocks for millions of years, turned them into soup, and the soup came alive 3 billion years ago. And this early life form found somebody to marry. Boy, now that's a good trick.
You think that pre-cellular life reproduced sexually
Get the fuck on with it, you ignorminous... ignorminous... shit stain.
And something to eat, of course, and slowly evolved into everything we see today. One professor was getting kind of upset about this time. I seem to do that to them.
Yeah, go fucking figure, huh? Getting pissed off when you remind him that some grown-ass fucking men are dumber than a fucking fourth grader.
He said, Mr. Hovind, there are hundreds of varieties of dogs in the world. I said, yes, sir, you're right about that. He said, you mean to tell me that you believe all these dogs came from 2 dogs off a Noah's Ark? You expect me to believe that? Ha, ha, ha. I said, sir, would you look at what you're teaching your students? You're teaching your students that all the dogs in the world came from a rock.
You think scientists think abrogenesis happened just like the Miller Urey experiment, right? Right? Fucking answer me, twat. Sorry, I get loud sometimes when I drink. I still love you, man. But what flask was the rock in?
I had one lady, a woman, come to me after a debate one time. She was steaming down the aisle, boy, she was mad. Oh, I could tell, I'm in trouble now. I stood there quivering in my boots, you know. She walked up and she said, tonight, you said, we believe we come from a rock. We do not believe that. I said, well, ma'am, calm down just for a minute. I said, do you believe in evolution? She said, yes, I do. I'm a professor here at the university. I said, well, would you please tell me then where we came from? She said, we came from a macromolecule. I said, where did that come from? She said, from the oceans, from the prebiotic soup. I said, where did that come from? She said, well, it rained on the rocks for millions of years. And you could see it was slowly dawning on her. I do believe I come from a rock, don't I? Yes, ma'am, you do. You ought to be proud of it. Hey, don't step on Grandpa, whatever you do. Look, that's stupid, okay? There's no kind way to say it.
Grandpa? Don't step on Grandpa! It's so funny! Grandpa!
Aren't you can't? You're a fucktard. Aren't you can't? You're a fucktard. Aren't you can't? I don't think he knows the shit that he believes is just a fucking joke. But what is really sad is people out there buying into the shit he preaches.
Lamp!
Look, I have a boomerang.
Uncle Lucifer, I'm bored. Can we leave and go to the erotic petting zoo again?
It was magic or whatever. Stop asking questions.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, an electrical discharge happened to be used in this experiment, but other more likely energy sources have...
It's that butt. I can't get over that butt. I just can't get over it. Really, fuck that butt. Fuck it.
Yeah, what? It's your butt.
Fuck that butt.
Okay.
Fuck my butt. I can deal with it in post.
Yeah?
Yeah, I can deal with it.
Okay, you will have so much fun.
I know, but I mean...
This is like, you know...
Don't point that out to me. I don't want to know that.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
There's probably no way to ever detect it. The surrounding conditions, that is, the environment on the early
Fuck.
are...
Stop pausing me. Stop being me and pausing me. Just spit your words out in a row and stop
putting breaks between all of them. Every word has like a pause, and it's like a second, or half a second, or like 7/13 of a second. It's a nightmare.
You recorded that.
Yeah, well, I want to smack myself in the head.
It's such a proof.
Fuck it. It'll do.
That's a killer argument against it being true. Whoo!
What is this who? Why do I have a who?